Welcome all back to BRC and Friends. I'm glad you all are here today. I'm very excited to welcome Holly Tabor. Holly is a PhD and associate professor of medicine at Stanford University, just down the street where I live, and associate director for clinical ethics and education at the Stanford Center of Biomedical Ethics. That's a very long, that's like three business cards, but I'm going to keep going. She's also the co-chair of the ethics committees for Stanford Hospital and Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. She's published a wide range of topics in bioethics, ethical issues, and genetics. And I was reading this over, and I'm like, I had to go genetics and genomic medicine.
That's right. Yeah, where's that? I don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's stuff. She's also written and spoken about a lot of ethical issues, inclusive of health practices for adults and children with disabilities. So welcome, Holly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So glad you could be here. As I do with all my guests, I first just ask you, who is Holly? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's important to know? How would you introduce yourself?
Oh, so hard. You start with the hard questions, right? Yeah, so I was actually just talking to a student earlier today. I kind of am this weird unicorn thing. I was telling her that if you told me in college or even maybe graduate school that the job I do now existed, I wouldn't have believed you. So I kind of fell into, like many people, I kind of fell into what I do through a combination of luck and random choices and non-random choices. But I do a lot of work. One of the things I like about my job is I have a lot of variety. So I help run the clinical ethics consult services at the Adult and Children's Hospital, and I think a lot about ethical issues in day-to-day life in a hospital and in a health system. And those are issues that I think about as an employee and as someone who works with a lot of healthcare providers and doctors and nurses, but I also think about it as a patient and as a family member and as a community member. And I get to work with all sorts of different kinds of people, including patients and families. And I supervise the team that does that throughout our hospital. And so that's something I do that's really meaningful and important to me, and that I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of. I really enjoy. I also do some research, like you mentioned. I do research on ethical issues in genetics and new technologies that come up related to genetics research and treatments for genetic disease. And then I get to do some teaching. So I teach all the medical students at Stanford. I teach them the ethics thread that they have to take. I teach graduate students about research ethics. This year, I'm teaching an undergraduate class, co-teaching an undergraduate class about ethical issues related to brain death and organ donation in the US and Japan, which is a really interesting course. So I get to do some teaching, get to meet a lot of really neat people, students and other people through that. So I get to do a lot of different things. And then I'm also a parent. I have two boys who one's almost 19 and about to graduate from high school, and one is 15. And they both have learning disabilities. And so that's affected a lot of I've learned a lot from them, and I've become much more aware and educated about a lot of the historical and current challenges that people with disabilities face in our society. And so that's also a place where my personal life and my professional work kind of intersect. And so I've been doing some more work in my job hat on related to that, as well as my mom hat on. Yeah, I've lived on the West Coast for about 26 years, and I originally grew up on the East Coast, and just really happy to get to be here with you, a long admirer of you and your work, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm glad you could be here. So what did you study in college, and where did you go? Just curious.
Yeah, I went to Harvard, and I studied history of science. So I was really, I thought I wanted to be I not even thought I wanted to be pre-med. I was pre-med. But I didn't really want to study all science classes all the time. And they had this major that was history of science. And it was like this cool way to learn about the sort of social meaning of science and how science and medicine have kind of become the way they are. And so in this weird twist, so my undergraduate thesis was on screening tests for diphtheria at the turn of the century, like infectious disease epidemiology, a little timely now. And then my PhD is in epidemiology. So I got really interested in epidemiology. And so that's also kind of timely right now. And then I went and became an ethicist, which is also kind of timely right now. So the things I did were like completely boring to everyone until about 6 months ago. And now it's
Now all of a sudden you're super popular.
so, well, yeah, I mean, it's an odd intersection of things, but yeah,
That's
I
so,
wish it wasn't popular right now. Don't get me wrong.
yes, exactly. I was just talking with somebody and we were talking about how this is changing the nature of church, and that we're kind of telling people that, like, you're net this is a never going to have this time again. We hope, like, we really don't want this to happen again, but that's where we are. I mean,
Church and social connection outside of churches and medicine, I think it's changing a lot of things. No, I totally agree.
Right. So I certainly have some pedantic kind of questions for you, but also so we can talk a little deeper too. But tell me, I know that in the last few months, as we're in California and in the middle of the COVID-19, we're still somewhat sheltered in place, but are beginning to open up. But our whole thing was flattening the curve. Mm-hmm. And it feels like we did. It feels like we flattened the curve and that there was a lot of prep. So what's the status kind of as you're working in the medical field? How are hospitals doing? What's kind of the nature of things going on right now?
Well, I think it's really regional. So I'll just kind of preface what I'm saying by saying a lot of what I know and what I can say is based on my own experience and some of the experiences I know about locally from people I know locally. I know enough to know it's different in different places. I think we all saw that particularly a month or two ago with New York being affected hard.
And for listeners, we're in Santa Clara County, for those of you that are wondering where Palo Alto and Stanford are.
What is today, May? The other thing I'm noticing is when you read posts and podcasts, you have to think about what day.
Yes.
May 26th.
What day it is, exactly.
May 26th, not March 26th, not July 26th.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I think where we are, at least, I think we have flattened the curve. I think the problem with flattening the curve is, I think many of us kind of, I think it's human nature, thought we'd flatten the curve and then we would be done. And the whole idea of flattening the curve is it actually smushes it down, and so it lengthens the curve, lengthens the duration of the curve, as well as reducing the number of cases and hopefully the number of deaths and hospitalizations. So I think, and it's been a little variable even in our own area. There was a study in San Francisco about how the Mission and other neighborhoods were much more severely affected. So it's not even homogeneous within a city or within a region. I think some of the San Jose hospitals had more cases than the Santa Clara and than the ones in northern Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. So there's a lot of variability. I think they've succeeded. The nice thing that the efforts have led to in the last couple of months is that Stanford, at least, and Packard, I think they've been very public about the fact that they've gotten really good protocols in place, and they feel now like they can really keep patients safe at the hospital and people who are coming to the clinics and to the hospital very safe. And they have, as far as I know, no cases to date of transmission from patients in the hospital to other patients or to healthcare providers, which is a really good thing and should be really reassuring to people. I think they're more worried now about people not coming in because they are scared. Not coming in when they don't feel well to the doctor, not coming into the emergency room and maybe waiting longer than they should, and then it being harder for them to get the care they need and get better. And so I think they're very worried about that now. They're worried about kids and babies not getting immunizations. And so I think they're trying to figure out ways to continue to convey the message that, you know, they have PPE and that it's safe, and that they're trying to make it as welcoming as possible for people. But that's not true everywhere around the country. Absolutely not.
Right. It's kind of a weird dynamic, right? Where, like, we want you to be really concerned about this, so stay home, don't risk going out. But yet now it's this weird middle space of, but if you need to go out, please do come. It's safe. Because I've heard of a lot of folks that are like, I'm just not going to the hospital. I'm not going to do it.
I think I truly do believe that hospitals in our area, at least, are safe now. And I think, but I get it. Like, I think I don't want to pretend like I haven't felt some of the same things. I think it's a very normal human reaction. But I think we're all going to have to change. It's interesting. I've been talking with a colleague about this, and, instead of thinking about risk as a light switch, or we have to think about it more as a series of dials, and that we're going to be adjusting the dials in response to a variety of different situations and needs. Right. And I think your risk tolerance should be pretty high for something related to your health, but your risk tolerance for poolside bar, maybe you should not do that. So not you personally, but so I mean, I
Oh
think,
no, I better cancel my party.
but I mean, and I think everything in between, seeing your friends and neighbors and
Yeah.
your family, getting your plumbing repaired, life will go on before we have a solution to this. It won't be a switch, and we'll probably have to dial up and dial back. And that's sort of, I think, cognitively really hard for most of us. And I think I forwarded you, I think there was this piece, couple pieces in the New York Times Magazine this weekend that really struck me and affected me. But some of them were about the kinds of transformations that happen. You were saying this before about church, but one of the transformations is the transformation of our notion of risk. I think we kind of got used to risk being not for everybody in all situations, but from a public health standpoint, we got used to risk being kind of low. And we're kind of going to have to go back to the way it was 100 years ago, where we don't think about risk that way for a while. And so I think that's a transformation that's happening too at the same time as all the other ones. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And then you combine that with kind of this American culture of exceptionalism and I'm the exception piece, which feels like, I'm just going to say, it feels like in other parts of the country, I know we have it here, but in other parts of the country, it seems that it takes this wide swath where folks aren't changing their risk behavior. They're just going out as if it just switched back on and you could just go back out.
Well, I've been saying this since the beginning, that I feel like there's just this real cognitive bias that everybody has to some degree, which is to, like you said, to think of yourself as the exception. It's like, well, but I need to get my car fixed, so that's okay. So I'm going to do that. And the thing is, it's not all black or white, and what's right for one person may not be right for somebody else. But I do feel very strongly that in ethics, we talk a lot about balancing risks and benefits. And I think for a lot of healthcare stuff, the benefit risk ratio goes pretty far in the direction of going to the doctor or the dentist if you really need to. And so I think the other really good thing for tough situations like that, both when you wonder whether you shouldn't be doing something or whether you wonder whether you should be doing it, is to have a couple people you talk to that you bounce it off of. And so they can say, no, you're being paranoid. You really need to go to the doctor. It's important. Right. Or they can say, no,
don't do that.
Don't do that. That's nuts. You know what I mean? Yeah. And make them people who aren't necessarily always people who agree with you. And kind of, I think more than ever, we need that. We all need that kind of gut check with other people. Like, you did what? You're going to do what? Or, oh yeah, you need to go do that. That's important, And so I think that's kind of what I'm encouraging a lot of people in our friends and family circle to do, is like, talk to people about what you're going to do. So.
Yeah. How does that work within your own family dynamic? So in my family, my mom is one of those that has never been a rule follower and is just at that age where she's not feeling her mortality. So she's going to follow rules strictly and has 9 grandchildren and just one born during this time, which she's not been able to hold. But all the siblings, we're just like, no, Mom, you are not, you stay home. We don't want to see. It's been a really interesting thing for mostly my sisters have been really, because they have the littlest kids. Yeah. And so they're just on my mom all the time. You can't come over. Or if you're going to come over, you're outside and we're inside. And I mean, so how are you just personally balancing all that?
It's hard. And I feel for your family, because I think births and other things are those times when we really want to be with people. And I think for people, our parents' generation too, it's isolating. I think, your mom seems very well connected, but I think, for many people, it's an isolating time in life, and adding additional barriers can be really hard. So my older son is graduating from high school next week, and yeah, I mean, and is it the worst thing that's happening? No, not even close, no. But I think he's come to terms with it. I think he's also kind of ready for the next chapter. So maybe it's just as well, on the one hand. We don't have much family around this area at all. So we don't have that problem. We're doing a lot of calling them on Zoom anyway. So, and actually in a positive way, we're actually talking to them more than we did before, which I think there's some good things about that. My husband, Eric, and I, I keep joking he needs to like write an essay or maybe do his own podcast about what it's like to be married to an epidemiologist.
I was just going to say. Is it exhausting or is it exciting or is it
Yeah.
like...
But I mean, I think, in the beginning, I had this moment when it all started, when I was sitting in, I mean, I'd heard about it before. I actually did some debriefing sessions with nurses at our hospital. And part of the debriefing we did was, tell me about when you first heard about COVID and what was that like? And it's sort of starting the narrative arc of how you got into this crisis. And so I was kind of doing that for myself. And I had heard about it before, but then I was sitting in a meeting and they warned us that we might have to teach classes remotely in the spring. And my first reaction was, oh, that's crazy. We're not going to do that. And then I just like had this light bulb moment of like, oh my God. I mean, I don't know what happened. It was literally like, literally a light bulb went off.
Yeah.
And I came home and I said to Eric, I'm like, oh my God, they're going to close down school. Well, this is what's going to happen. And, we had a volunteer meeting at my son's school and I'm like, we're going to do it by Zoom. And, I was maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks behind everybody else, or ahead of a lot of other people. And I think many of my friends and family were like, yeah, nice, Holly. And Holly's a little crazy. She's, and I don't think it was because I was particularly like bright or, it was just that somehow like something clicked in my head. And so I think that's made it easier for my family to get used to that a little quicker because we started earlier, and it felt a little less abrupt, I think. My son still went to school for another week and a half after that because I realized it was probably the end of his senior year and I didn't want to take that away from him, But yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think we're getting antsy. Everybody's getting antsy. And I think the other thing is the indeterminacy. We don't know how long it's going to be. And it's the parts of our brain that want to plan for the future just don't really fit. But I think I think every week is kind of a new normal. And we're sort of, I think the panic about it has sort of subsided a little bit. And, I think I'm also, because I have teenagers, they're in the, you understand this, they're in the natural stage of development of social distancing.
Yep, exactly. I watch my siblings with little kids. They have to entertain them all the time. I'm lucky if I see one of them for more than a couple hours a day.
I'm 100% in with you. My siblings have younger kids too, and they're like, oh my God. And so, but it's nice. I mean, I think it gives them some independence too. So I think it'll be weird when and if we do go back, and everybody's wondering how that'll be. But yeah, so I think we're just figuring it out every day like everybody else,
Yeah, I know that's similar to our house too. I mean, I think folks are like, so how's it going? I'm like, well, pretty much the same as it went yesterday.
Right.
But yeah, we have a junior who has said multiple times that she'll say she was built for this. Like she has this great room where we live. She doesn't have a huge need, and remember we came into this area. She's a transfer kid, so she's doesn't have this deep sense of social commitments to people. It's our other one who started college and had to come back after half of her first semester.
So hard. Yeah.
And then may or may not go back in the spring or in the fall. So
I feel for them. It's really
I mean, she's always like, yeah, I know there are worse things, and I'm not a senior in college, so it's like it's not as if that happened. But still, like you had just left, and you're like 3 or 4 months into this new exciting thing, and now you could be home again for 7 months.
Yeah, well, and I've been doing, I think because I need it too, I've been doing a lot of reading about, how can you frame things when there's uncertainty, and it relates to some of the work I do, when you're talking to people who have serious illnesses and life-ending or life-limiting illnesses, which I know you do sometimes too, and how do you frame hope and planning when you have a lot of uncertainty? And I've been thinking a lot about that for my kids and for their peers and your kids too, and I think some of it is this idea. Chris Feutner and Abby Rosenberg are colleagues of mine in palliative care, and they talk about this idea that we have like an architecture of hopes, that sometimes in medicine we do too much, what are you hoping for? Mm-hmm. And then the patient or the family will say, well, I'm hoping for a cure.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, I'm hoping for that too. But what else are you hoping for?
Yeah, exactly.
And that people can have multiple hopes. They can have seemingly contradictory hopes, that sometimes having some hopes that are not likely to happen in combination with some hopes that are likely to happen is actually kind of a coping mechanism that we all use, So I hope that COVID goes away and we have a vaccine in a month. Okay. What else are you hoping for?
Okay.
But you don't have to say that's crazy. That's not
right. That's it. Yeah. What are you thinking?
You can acknowledge where that comes from, and so try and think about that. And then the other thing that I've been thinking about is Eric actually sent me another podcast from, he's a big podcast guy. In fact, I got him a t-shirt one year for Christmas. I get like joke things for Christmas for the family. And I looked so hard for this and I was so psyched when I found it. I got him a t-shirt that says, I listen to podcasts and therefore I am an expert.
It is not far from the truth from my
right?
serious podcast friends.
Yes. So, but anyway, he found so he always knows all the good podcasts. And so or a lot of them. So he sent me one that he listens to, Invisibilia. And there was one that was, it's a fairly long and complicated one, but one of the lessons in it was this idea that I know I've heard other places too, of think of what the next best thing to do is. So particularly when there's uncertainty or when things are unsure and you're struggling with not being able to plan. And in that podcast, it was someone who had ALS, who knew that she wasn't going to retain her physical function forever and that she had a degenerative disease. What's the next right thing to do? And if you can think about things that way, that then you can sort of have a concrete thing to focus on and not focus on, but how am I going to deal with COVID in the world, I mean, not that that's not important, but if you think about what's the next right thing to do. So I'm trying to think about that with both myself and the kids and what's the next right thing and in the work I do too, what's the next right thing to do? And then we'll worry about the 20 things down, when we get there.
Well, and I found that, this might be my personality type or just whatever, but not everything has to be amazing. Like it can just be something, and not everything has to be productive, and not just kind of like I watch all my friends making bread and I'm like, I don't have to make bread. No. It's great. I love watching people do it. I don't need to do that. I'll try something else. I mean, but right. What are those things that I found it really kind of cool. Like both kids are involved in their particular passions, and they're now phone banking that's one of the things they're doing. One is phone banking. One's phone banking for Moms Demand Action, and one's phone banking to end mass incarceration. And
that's awesome. I love that.
So it's so funny to watch them kind of go through this process, because one who's doing it with Moms Demand Action when they signed up, they took the cold call list.
Oh yeah, the hard.
And we're like, why'd you do that? She's like, I don't know. I don't, because the other one took the list that says people who said yes, contact me. I'm like, they're the ones that
for that. Yeah. No, that's so funny. So you need to tell them that that is. So I had a job in college where I was working for a research group for a large study called the Women's Health Study, which was a study by mail of nurses and doctors. And anyway, it was hundreds of thousands of people. And they had to fill out a pre-questionnaire, and then they frequently filled it out wrong or filled it incompletely. And so my job was to cold call people.
Oh my gosh.
And ask them about their questions. But they were often things like, I see that you said that you're still nursing your child at age 65. Is that correct? It was sort of things like that, It was not always the most comfortable of questions to be cold calling.
It's so good for you.
Yeah. Well, and then also, in this day and age, we think about it differently, but they were only given the options on the form of filling out male or female, which they would not do now. But back then that was what they did. And people would fill it out. They would just fill in it was not a matter of gender identity. People would just fill in it wrong sometimes, but you wanted to be respectful. So you had to figure out a way to be like, I'm asking you about question number 2. And, and they're like, oh, why are you asking me that? I'm like, well, I just want to know what your answer is and make sure we record it accurately. And so anyway, but as a result of that job, I can call anybody about anything. I have no fear.
I'm sure.
I did that for, a whole summer, and I can call anybody about anything. And lots of people can't do that. Lots of people are scared of the phone or talking to strangers. Yeah. Your kids are going to be like pros. They're going to be able to call anybody about anything. Cold call anybody.
I was like, because I'm like, has anybody been mean yet? And like, yeah, a couple of people are mean. And I'm like, she's like, man, whatever. I'm like, okay, good. All right, here you go. Keep going.
I mean, that's the other thing is you probably have this in your work, your whole career, you learning to have people be mean to you and not take it personally is a serious life skill too. So,
Yeah. And sometimes it comes out of it comes out of, working through things like worship and all those kinds of things at the church. Especially now, I've talked with some other folks on podcasts about now that we're virtual and folks are now at the place where they're so comfortable with it, they're able to complain. Yeah. And I actually think that's not a bad thing. I think that's actually, I'm trying to frame with staff that part of getting into some groove is that folks are feeling like this is theirs. Yeah, and when they feel like it's theirs.
Yeah, and I love it. I will say I really am enjoying the virtual worship, which isn't to say that, isn't to say there aren't things that I miss, because I think everybody does. But I just think, it's one of the things, going back to the disability thing I talked about earlier, it's so accessible to people, and I know it's not accessible to everybody, but I think it has the potential to be accessible to a lot of people. And it won't be forever, but I think it's pretty cool. And I love the way you do it. So.
And no format is accessible. I've been trying to help folks realize no format is accessible to everyone. Our face-to-face leaves a lot of folks, right? I mean, tons of people. So. Well,
and just being able to see people's faces, like I was saying that to Eric one previous Sunday, that like when you're all facing the same direction, you see the backs of people's heads. Which is fine. Like you recognize their heads, and maybe you see the people on the row next to you, but it's kind of cool to see more people's faces too. I mean, So you're doing, I think it's a type of creativity.
I'm teaching a few courses in the next 6 months around hybrid church. Now that our church has decided not to do in-person worship, at least until 2021. What does hybrid look like? Because the inertia to go back to location is going to be so strong. But how do we actually say it's actually, we're all in this expanded space. Some of us will happen to be physically here and others will still be. And how do we not kind of tier that as better or worse, but actually have it be communal? I think that's going to be such an exciting kind of next stage for churches that can do it. And not all churches are going to be able to. But I think we're poised to do that.
I'm really interested to hear how you approach that, because I think education is going to be that way too, and we don't know how to do it. We're going to have to figure it out, and I think we're going to learn from people who figured it out in other venues. And I think we're going to be hybrid a lot of things for a while. So
it is. Yeah, it's an odd time. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and ask you a few more questions. So let's take a quick break.
Thanks.
And we're back. Good to, but still continuing on talking with Holly about ethics and COVID and all kinds of good stuff. But so this is, like I asked you before, like a totally broad question, because I live in the world and the bubble in which I live, in the kind of the sphere of influence and activity. But are there ethical questions that you're seeing people asking of themselves or being faced with that maybe some of us maybe haven't thought about? I mean, what are some of the things that you find folks are really kind of struggling with or wrestling with these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's again, I won't get them all, but I think some of them are really important. One, even not in COVID times, but it comes up even more starkly in COVID times, which is, if you can't make healthcare decisions for yourself, who do you want to make healthcare decisions for you? Who would be the person who you'd like to be your surrogate decision maker? And writing that down or telling your doctor so that people can know that, because it's important. And I think it gives people a lot of peace of mind to know that someone's making decisions for them that they trust. Ideally, you have conversations with that person about what you do and don't want in various situations, but that doesn't always happen. But at least that person knows you, knows what's important to you, knows something about your values in your life. And so I one of the things I teach, and when I talk about this to even outside people, is one of the most important things you can do is designate who you want to be your surrogate decision maker. Ideally an advanced directive document, but you can just write it down too. And especially in the state of California. It varies a little bit state by state. So that's one thing that I think is really important. That becomes, the visitation stuff has been really hard, although it's changing now in a good way. When COVID started in California, as well as in other places, they really limited, no one could come in as a visitor in the adult hospital unless someone was dying. And dying really imminently. And that there have been all sorts of really painful, tragic stories about that throughout the country. And I think that also, there was actually a story in the New York Times, I think that made people really reluctant to come into the hospital because they didn't want to come in without someone there. At our hospitals, there was always an exception for kids. They would allow one parent to come or guardian to come in with kids. The state of California, about 2 weeks ago, I think, issued some new guidance that allows them to be a little bit more flexible about visitors in both the pediatric and adult hospitals. Especially now, we're trying to be flexible with patients who need ongoing care, either because of physical or cognitive mental disabilities. So there's a little bit more flexibility. But like I said about the dials, we're going to have to, have to adjust that. We may have times where we have to get more restrictive again. We may eventually have to have tests of visitors once we have enough tests. And so I think people worry about what it's like to both be a patient in the hospital when you can't have a visitor, what it's like to be the family or friends of someone when you can't visit someone, whether they have COVID or not, and what it's like to be the healthcare provider when you feel like you really want to provide not just the literal technical care for a person, but you want to be caring and supportive to someone who doesn't have their family or their friends with them. And so I think healthcare providers are really feeling a lot of ethical burden about they want to do the right thing and they want to be there for people. And so I think it's a lot of stress for healthcare providers too in that situation. And I think that goes back to the other broad thing, which is I think healthcare providers are under tremendous stress right now, of all kinds, even if they're not people taking care of COVID patients. I think, people are going through economic, financial hardship and uncertainty. People, have family and friends who are sick. They have family and friends who are working in places that are more seriously, intensely affected. And I just think, and I think they feel, one of the nurses I worked with said that, they watch each other. This was someone who took care of COVID patients. They watch each other take PPE on and off as a sort of check, like I'm making sure you're following the protocol. And it just feels like a tremendous responsibility. They want to, they have each other's life in their hands. And so I think it's a different, and the things we all do this is true for all of us, the things we do to decompress and to relax and to take our minds off of things aren't always available anymore. And so I think it's just like, it's a stressful time for everybody. I spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about our healthcare providers. And then I think we're all still planning for, a lot of hospitals are trying to figure out how to plan for the crisis getting worse. They're trying to plan for, they're still worried about being ready if we ran out of ventilators, even though we seem to have flattened the curve. I think they're worrying about, because they had to cancel a lot of elective procedures. Unfortunately, our current healthcare system's financing is really based around a certain volume of elective procedures. And so the hospitals and healthcare systems themselves are laying people off and having people take PTO and other kinds of things. And so I think that's an ethical challenge as well. And then how do we provide good care for people who have all the things that have nothing to do with COVID, all the things that, heart disease, asthma, all the ordinary things we all have, and how do we support people in those situations? So, and then I think it's not the last one by far, but the other one that is a really big ethical issue is the huge health disparities that have been laid even more bare by the crisis, and the fact that the illness and the deaths are absolutely disproportionately affecting communities of color and socially, financially disadvantaged communities, and really revealing the severe inequities in our society and the ways in which we don't have safety nets for people, and we don't provide basic health care to people. I think, and that not only hurts those people, but it hurts everybody. And I think there are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we told you so, but that's not very satisfying at this point.
No, it is the least satisfying I told you so that you could ever have at this point. Yeah.
And then the one last, I forgot one other group I'm worried about. I'm many worries. I think, I worry a lot because I think a lot about patients with disabilities. I think a lot about adults with disabilities and children and families of children with disabilities who really depend on the school system and depend on the healthcare system for a lot of their daily lives and their social interactions. My husband's really involved in Special Olympics, and there are a lot of adults with disabilities for whom Special Olympics is their community, and they can't get together with any of those people, and there's a lot of social isolation, and we don't know when that's going to end. And they're trying to build virtual communities like you were talking about, but I worry about a lot of those people. So those are some of the ethical issues, but I think they're really still all about the same principles. It's just how do we do it in the new reality.
So how do you help an institution like Stanford and the hospital make some of those decisions? I mean, I can imagine. I mean, we on the outside, we see the decision, right? We see, okay, you can't visit, you can't visit, or there's exceptions.
Yeah.
But how does that even actually work where you're helping this large behemoth of a organization?
I mean, part of it, like everything else in life, is relationship. I think, a lot of it is trying to build relationships with people who make those decisions, and then be a part of conversations and ask good questions. I mean, I think partly because I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD. I like to joke that I'm a fake doctor. But
But yeah, I'm faker than you because I have an honorary.
Oh, that's even more prestigious, though. That's prestigious. No, so
if I started putting doctor on my friends would be very quick to remind me.
Yeah, but no, I mean, trust me, I had some blood, sweat, and tears for my doctor, but it just,
I know you do.
He wouldn't want me taking care of anybody. But, I get to ask questions, and this goes in pre-COVID times too, is like, but why? But why? I don't understand. And I think, sometimes if you're actually a physician, you worry you might look stupid if you ask that question. And I just don't really worry about looking stupid. And I also feel like it's more of an innocent, like, I really don't understand. And I think I will say that at Stanford in particular, people are very open to those conversations, and they've been both leadership and just people who are on the front lines really welcome people with an ethics background to the rooms and the tables where those conversations are happening. And so, does that mean we solve everything just by waving a magic wand? No, of course not. But I think we learn as we go, like everybody else does. But I think, it's thinking creatively. The other thing that happens in your work too is like, well, how can we think outside the box here? Maybe we can't do it that way, but can we think about how to do it this way? What are some other ways we can try to achieve the same goals? And so it's a lot of meetings. Sometimes it's writing up policies. Sometimes it's we have a consult service that's available 24/7. So people call us and they say, okay, well, I know the policy is this, but this situation seems a little bit different. Can you help me think through how to apply this? And so some of it is being willing to talk through that with people and not pretend that we have all the answers, because I mean, sometimes people think ethics is the police, and we're really not the police. and trust me, it would look very different if we were the police. But I think we're advisory, and we can be a partner with people, including with patients and families, in figuring things out. And so we just try to work together with people and keep open lines of communication. So that's kind of sounds fuzzy, but that's really basically what it is.
No, I don't think of ethics as the police. I see ethicists as asking us the right questions, right? You're asking the questions to help us get to a good place, or to make them better, as if there was ever any one right answer.
Well, we all have values, and we all have perspectives. When I teach the medical students, I often try to say, like, before you figure out, every clinical encounter is an ethical encounter, whether you think it is or not. And you better figure out what your gut feeling is before you start figuring out what you think the right thing to do is. Because if you can't separate what your own gut feeling or your own values are from the situation or your patient's values or something else, you're gonna have a hard time thinking about how to handle it in an ethical way. And so part of it is like, this patient reminds me of my grandfather, and I think that we did the wrong thing there, so I think we should do this. It's like, okay, well, make sure you name that, and then you put it over there, and then you engage with the patient in front of you about what's going on.
So basically, I mean, that's like clinical pastoral education for many of us, right? You can walk into a room, then you leave, and you have to spill your guts about how did every part of it impact you, and what did it bring up, and
absolutely, it's very similar. Yeah, no, I've talked to a lot of people who work in chaplaincy in a hospital too. So there's a lot of that sort of like, you're a human being, or else you couldn't do the work, and so it's exactly you, no matter what. So, but it also feels like a place where making connection can make a difference sometimes. I like that part of it. So
humans and humans. I think that's always better.
I'm all for humans. Yes.
All right. This is great. Thank you so much. So as I do with all my guests, I ask a couple of questions at the end. You had a little bit of time to think about it, but don't worry about this. No
pressure. Question.
So what are you listening to? What are you reading? And what are you watching? So what are you listening to? And people do music, podcasts, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I just listened to that Invisibilia podcast, and I think I forwarded you the name of it, but it was about this woman who developed a sense of smell where she could smell what diseases people had before they had it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating. So maybe you have those
Okay.
links and you can share it.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes at the
Yeah,
bottom.
I do love one of the podcasts I really love is that's kind of light but also good and led me to a lot of other really good books is the History Chicks. They do sort of hour-long profiles of women in history, and I enjoy that. So I listen to that. What am I reading? I am reading. I'm not sure this is a good example of what I normally read, but I'll be honest with you. So I'm reading, I do recommend that New York Times Magazine from last Sunday. There are like 6 great essays in there about quarantine and thinking about quarantine. One of them was about watching nature outside your window and how that helps you manage uncertainty, and it used a comparison to prisoners of war in World War II. So that was interesting. I'm also reading The Last of Your Springs, which is a book of essays by Donald Kennedy, who is the former president of Stanford, who unfortunately just died of COVID about a month ago.
Right.
And I read that because it was recommended by my friend Julie Lithcott-Hames, who's written several books too. And there's some good stuff in there, but it's not that representative of what I usually read. So, and then what I'm watching, I highly recommend Crip Camp on Netflix. If you haven't watched Crip Camp, I really love that documentary.
It shows up on my Twitter feed all the time because I have a lot of folks that are involved in disability movement and folks kind of keeping me honest about ableism stuff and all that. So I've certainly been watching it mentioned, but it's worth it.
And the book by Judy Heumann, who's profiled in that, her autobiography is on my list of things to read. I also have been watching Packard because I'm a Star Trek.
Oh yeah, so I've heard mixed reviews on Packard. Where are you?
I think I like it more than don't like it. It's darker. It's darker than the first one, and so I actually am trying to be careful about when I watch it because I don't want to watch it right before I go to sleep. I love Patrick Stewart, so I'll basically watch it. And it's got nice. We're watching it while watching. Someone in, I think it was in Vulture, wrote a guide of which episodes of Next Generation you should rewatch because they come up in Picard. So we're kind of like, we watch a couple of Next Generation episodes and then we watch Picard, and that's actually been kind of fun. So we're going slowly, but it's, I watch Next Generation.
So are you all the ones that then would be able to point out discrepancies?
I'm not quite that good, but yeah, but I am like, oh, I know that one. That's familiar. Right. I know that one. So yeah, no, I'm not quite that good. But my sister probably could. My sister had like, it wasn't a Star Trek themed wedding, but there was some Star Trek themed wedding. She's very serious. So that's been a fun watch.
Okay.
And yeah, I've also been, the other thing I've been doing is because my oldest son is graduating, I've been spending a lot of time watching old videos and looking at photos from his childhood. So that's kind of been fun. It's not something we usually do, and it's been a treat to do. So it's a little bit like This Is Your Life, you know. But, my 15-year-old was enjoying looking at them, and I said, oh, you know, what do you like about looking at them? He's like, I don't know. And then he said, but Mom, you were younger then. I'm like, yes,
great.
I was.
Yep,
Thank you for telling me. out of the mouths of babes.
Exactly. Not something I didn't know, but okay.
Thanks for telling me. So, but yeah, that's pretty much. But I welcome suggestions, and I love things that you've asked other people and written down several ideas.
Oh, ours are just trash. Most of my stuff, we're just like I'm one of those that there's enough. Like I embed myself with enough trauma and struggle that sometimes it's like I just want to watch Brain Candy. Like just let me.
Brain Candy is good.
Sit down.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They're not guilty pleasures. They are just pleasures.
Yeah. We watched, it wasn't, I don't know if it's Brain Candy. That may be being too much of a compliment, but we watched The Naked Gun last night, which does not really hold up.
Oh my God. I was going to say, does it hold up? It doesn't?
No, it doesn't.
I know some of those, we made the mistake of watching 16 Candles.
Oh yeah, that doesn't hold up either.
Oh my, I mean, I knew some of the parts, the racist stuff.
Rape.
But then, like, now it's all the date rape, the Abe was, like, I was like, oh my, how did.
I liked that movie at the time.
Oh yeah. I still remember our middle child, we're sitting there watching because we're like, oh, it's on Netflix. And both Rob and I are like, 16 Candles. We should watch it. And Yeah, Abby looks at us in the middle and says, "You all actually like this?" I mean, there was like disappointment in her, like
The
my
standards were
social
different.
justice parents.
Yeah.
And well, then we go into that, and then she's like, "That's what everybody says." Like that's.
No, she's right. She's not wrong. It's totally true.
I know exactly. I'm like, I know.
Yeah. Now, Colin did appreciate one thing about Naked Gun is in the beginning, he's getting off the plane and he falsely thinks the crowd and the press are for him, but they're there for Weird Al Yankovic. And we have decided that one of the things that has remained solid and held up is Weird Al. So
that is true.
Everything else in the movie,
that is
not so much, including O.J. Simpson and
oh my God, that's right.
But Weird Al's still holding strong.
And he's still going. Like he's.
No, he must have been like 30 then. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
He was,
Well, and I listened to an interview, maybe it was on Fresh Air or something, and he's so cutting edge. Like He was like, I'm not doing albums anymore because nobody buys albums. And this was years ago.
No, he's
like, I'm just really, yeah. I'm like, you are obviously a very smart man who made it.
No, he held up, but pretty much nothing else.
Yeah, nothing else.
I guess the Queen. Remember, there's a Queen Elizabeth. She's still alive.
Yeah.
So that part maybe held up, but the rest not so much.
That's actually pretty. My kids will not. They do not appreciate my humor because they would look at him like, we're not watching that. I'm like, okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. No,
all right. Well, thank you for being on.
Thanks for all you do, and it's not here. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
Take care.
And everybody, thank you all for listening again. As you know, subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff, review, wherever you listen to your podcasts on iTunes and Google and Spotify and all those places. And we'll see you next time back here at BRC and Friends. All right.